Hi, everybody. Good to be here with you today. Let's see. We're going to talk about mastery of the mind, and what we're really talking about today is the practices of yoga, and we'll focus on pranayama, mudra meditation, and a little bit about asana. So we're going to be to let me see. Yeah. So we're going to be doing that to help guide you in your practices. So let's just start from the beginning, right? So and get some clarity about what yoga can mean to us. So the word means union of body, mind, and the spirit. And so when we think about that, what that means is it's holistic. It's holistic in the sense that everything affects everything else. And our tendency is to think about things in compartments. And so the practices of yoga are to help us move away from that compartmentalized thinking. So everything is working together. And in order for that to happen, we have practices that we do that help to move us in a particular direction. So we talk about the goal in that, but perhaps it's the journey also. So, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the first thing that it says is that it says yogas chitta vritti nirodha. It's talking about the fluctuations of the mind. And so we practice then to develop some mastery of our mind. And so it's not like there's one point or a pinnacle necessarily. It is to have it become a great tool for us. And our relationship with our mind and how we utilize it dictates how we are in the world. So we may come to the practice of yoga for many different reasons. Most of us do, all different kinds of reasons. But we stay and we focus because inside of us, we know there is that ultimate goal. Some people call that moksha, or meaning that liberation and sense of freedom in this life. And so we all have this knowledge deep inside of us. And perhaps we long for it. So we want to experience the truth of who we are. I hear so many people today say that, that I want to feel like I have purpose and that. And we know that when we have a sense of connection to ourselves, that we can experience the stillness and the divine that's present in us. So this is why we practice. And then we gain many other benefits along the way, right? We get, we feel better on a day-to-day basis, and we say our health gets better in that. So practicing then in a sattvic manner, or one that brings a balanced manner that brings harmony to us. This is what's going to move us toward that moksha, or toward self-realization, increasing our awareness of ourselves and increasing our consciousness. And so the process of practice, it gives us the ability then to recognize that we're more than our mind, and that perhaps our mind can be trained to go in the direction that we'd like it to go. We train our mind all the time. It's basically on what we choose to focus on, right? And we can focus and habituate negative things or positive things. Yeah, and the mind and the body will do that. And so then it's a matter of who we are taking charge of that. In other words, we can train our mind to go toward hatred, or we can train it to go toward love. It can become stagnant, or it can be very mobile, moving all the time. And the mind is actually really well described by the Gravati Gunas. These are the 10 pairs of opposite qualities that I've been talking about in our podcast, Everyday Ayurveda and Yoga. So the practices of Ayurveda and yoga are to keep our prana, our life force, flowing. And that's when we feel well. And that's when we'll make better choices. And when we can make choices that will take us towards sattva, or a sense of balance and harmony and having peace. And that will bring us in the direction of a state of yoga, or state of union of our body, mind, and spirit. So So a primary access then to the functioning of the mind is through the breath, which is also called prana. So we have prana, our life force, we have prana, our breath, and the breath is the source of our life force. So it's an excellent indicator of what's really happening inside of us on a mental, emotional, and spiritual levels, particularly, as well as the physical. So when you get fearful or worried or frightened, what happens? Your breath gets shorter and faster. The physical body contracts, and as the cells contract, then the movement of prana is constricted, or restricted, I should say. And one of the things that happens then is that many people will have a fright or a trauma of some sort on any level, on a spiritual level, physical level, mental level, and the constriction then disturbs the breathing of the person. And a person can develop something called the reverse breathing pattern, where the diaphragm moves in the wrong direction with the breath. It's backwards. So for example, inhaling and expanding the belly and exhaling, releasing the belly, yeah, is how we will breathe and the body will relax. But if the person is replaying a trauma, they'll inhale and then draw their belly in, and the shoulders go up, right? And that will restrict what can come into the lungs, and it creates tension in the body. And the result is a shortened breath, and then it's a great detriment to health over time. And so that's something to just be aware of, is get to know your breathing. So this is part of the practice of yoga. And when we develop that relationship, then we gain an understanding of our inner landscape. So the tools of yoga, pranayama, meditation, our mudra, and our asana. And so with this kind of exploration and observation of ourselves, we can come to know ourselves as eternal spirit beyond our mind. And then we can begin to take charge of the mind. And so this is what really allows us to live, to practice what are called the yamas and niyamas, which are the first and second limbs of classical Ashtanga yoga, where it guides us on how to behave in the world and how to treat ourselves. And that's what has us become present in life. And we can experience life in a much deeper way and not leave a trail behind us in life, right? So we end up being able to do things most of the time that we can feel good about ourselves. And we also learn that we don't need to try to be perfect, but that these practices bring us to the perfection that's already within us. And then life is really in the journey. So I thought I'd just touch on each of those things that I mentioned, each of those practices. So the first one being pranayama. And probably I wanted to put it first because it's my favorite. It literally means breath control, or the extension of the prana as our life force. And pranayama is one of the 8 limbs of classical Ashtanga yoga. And it's very much a personal and a very precious practice. It's traditionally given to a student by the teacher in a one-on-one setting. And it's a practice that needs to be considered with reverence for the self and for the practice and for the teacher. And the starting point is wherever the person is. It may be extremely simple, just barely beyond just conscious breathing. And then as the student progresses and is ready, then the practice progresses. And when it becomes too easy, for example, meaning your mind can wander around and you can, make your grocery list and that while you're doing the practice, then the teacher will change the practice for you to bring greater challenge, but without creating stress. So let me just say that I'm talking about a practice that you sit down and you do the practice in a sattvic manner each day, and you meditate afterwards each time. So when it's practiced then in a sattvic manner, it's more of a surrender to the moment rather than trying to make something happen. And so there are a number of vigorous breathwork techniques. There are a number of vigorous pranayamas too, but the manner in which they're put into a practice will take you towards sattva. But there's some vigorous breathwork techniques that are around these days that people say they may have been inspired by yoga, but and there may be a place for them, but they're not a good idea on an ongoing basis because they can be too much stimulation. They'll imbalance vata dosha, and which can then destabilize the mind. So it'll increase our rajas rather than sattva. And then that doesn't take us toward a state of yoga. So you might feel elated for a while, but the rajasic nature of something that's extremely vigorous, it leads us to tamas eventually. So extreme practices lead to depletion. So long-term results come from long-term consistent practices. So you want to resist the temptation to look for the quick fix. But the interesting thing is that when you really surrender and let go and let yourself come into the practice, things change very quickly. But looking for the quick fix and trying to do more or pushing the practice, it will set you back. You know, pranayama progresses as we progress. It's really as the mind lets go and we start to see ourselves in a much bigger way. So what happens in retention or holding the breath is a significant part of that progression. So when you can comfortably pause and stop the breath without tensing the body or the mind, then it can have a calming effect on the mind and the body. And so that's something to keep in mind if you are starting to practice retentions or holding the breath with your pranayama. But what happens in that stillness is that we have a greater awareness of ourselves, and that awareness of ourselves beyond our mind. So pranayama can be harmful when it's done incorrectly. If you push the body and the mind, it can imbalance the doshas, and it can cause damage to the lungs and your nervous system. You know, I remember meeting a fellow one time and him telling me all about how he was doing Nauli Kriya, and that he was doing it 1,008 times. And he was a little bit wacky. So, you know, there's achievement in this isn't really what we're looking for. So I recently also had somebody send in a question who said they were doing an inhale retention with Agni Sour. And Agni Sour is an exhale retention. It's not meant to be done on an inhale. If you do an inhale retention and you try to draw your belly in, then you're going to push, the diaphragm's going to push up into the lungs, and you're going to put pressure on your lungs. And this is not smart. This will not bring good things. It's dangerous for your health. So the pranayama is not dangerous. It's how we practice it and how make sure that you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. That's the most important part of it. But the best results come with a consistent practice, meaning every day. And the breath works in a very subtle way, and the changes then are incremental. So if you have excess vata dosha, which is the air and the ethers part of us, then your mind is going to fight being irregular. It's not going to want to be regular. Don't listen to your mind. It's not in good shape, and it's not in your favor at that point. So it will take you to bondage, because that inconsistency, you know, your mind will tell you, oh, this is freedom, but it's really not. Yeah, the freedom comes when you have a greater sense of yourself and your knowing. And so consistent practice will take you to that. So when you have a balanced pranayama practice, and it helps to organize and calm vata dosha, and it enhances your relationship between your mind and your body and your spirit, and it increases the control that we have over our emotional and mental state just through the day. You know, I've been doing pranayama practice daily for many, many years, and the benefits are incredible. And it slows the aging process, it expands our breathing capacity, and it feeds it feeds us, and it feeds all areas of our life. And it's by far the most powerful of the practices. And it always should be followed with meditation. And so moving on to meditation, when we meditate because we want to come to know our inner world, right? People say, well, I want to calm my mind and I want to do this and I want to do that. It's all okay, except, but really what happens, it's so that we connect with the divine in us, or our sense of spiritual, our sense of spirit. You know, in most of our lives these days, our focus will tend to be on the outside. So what am I doing? What am I consuming? What am I accomplishing? Where are we going? What am I listening to? And what am I looking at? These are all the things that engage our senses. And so our senses go into overdrive. And so when we meditate and we turn inward, we learn to close off the senses. Now, maybe not right in the beginning, but there is one of the limbs of classical yoga that is just about that. It's pratyahara, about bringing your senses inward. We don't have time to talk about that today, but that's what part of what happens when you sit down to meditate. So think of it as coming home to yourself and saying hello to yourself as spirit. And sometimes you might even like to do that. You close your eyes and just say hello to yourself. It's not always easy to do, and that's why we do it. You know, if it was easy to do, we wouldn't need to do it. You know? But, you know, one of my great teachers said, do your practice and all is coming to you. And this has been my experience. You know, for example, if you're familiar with the formula Triphala, you know, the Triphala is 3 herbs that are used to help rejuvenate the lining of the intestines. And it's good and balancing for all 3 doshas, mostly. There are a little bit of exception to that. But, you know, that in the beginning, if you take it in a powder form, for example, the worse it tastes, they say, the more you need it. It's bitter when you need it. And then as you get better, then it tastes good. It tastes fine. It doesn't bother you. Well, the same with meditation. So the greater the difficulty with meditating, the more that we perhaps need it. Yeah. But eventually then it becomes sweet and pleasant for us. And then you might get a day where it's really difficult. But it's one of those things that if you stay with it, we start to see that sometimes we're really just pulled outside of ourselves and we're distracted. Or we're overstimulated, which is very common these days. So there are lots of techniques for meditation, and they can all work. And some are better for some people than others, meaning, so there's not just one way here. And, you know, we don't have to make anybody right or wrong about it. But some constitutions are better with focusing the mind. Some constitutions do just fine with other techniques. So again, daily meditation, it's like anything. You've probably learned to brush your teeth every day, right? And that's a good practice, right? Because I want to take care of my teeth. Well, if we want to take care of our mind and we want to take care of our connection to ourself, daily meditation is it. So learning to sit still for up to 30 minutes, but you know, it's important. But start with 5, start with 3 minutes if that's where you are. It's okay, because what will happen is that you'll start to, your spirit will start to call you to it. So just that willingness to close your eyes, to sit still and go inside, this is beneficial. And it will start you on a new track in life. And you might use a guided meditation in the beginning. We have a little 5-minute meditations, Spark Your Intuition, which have some tools that you can use in meditation. Or you may just follow your breath or use a mantra. For many people, giving the mind a focal point is important, because that's what will help you get started. So choose a technique and stay with it, and get the guidance of an experienced teacher who practices, and we're always happy to help you with that. And then I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about mudras. So mudras are based in marma points. Now I'm going to be talking mostly about hand mudras today, but there are also other mudras that are with the body, with the tongue, for example. But these marma points in the hands, then they support a specific flow of prana. So there are a lot of nerves in the hands, and so that's why we focus there, in the hands and in the fingers, which makes them particularly receptive and sensitive to the movement of prana. You know, we talk about our healing hands, right? And so practicing mudras then will have an effect on the subtle body, on the energy body, on the chakras and the nadis being these more subtle energy channels. And they connect the chakras also. So in some traditions, each finger is identified with a particular element. Some traditions differ from others. And what's most important is for your direct experience, to work with them and see what happens. So stimulating a variety of combinations will produce some specific results. So, you know, mudras are useful for helping to balance the doshas. I like to use them with people in the beginning because you will get a very nice effect in having an effect on the body and on the mind. And they may also be more focused on the spiritual energies or the flow of our senses, our sense of spirit. I like to start people with ones where they're going to get an effect that's fairly prompt, and that's to help balance Vata dosha particularly. So, so you can use a mudra during meditation for, let's say, for 5 minutes. Usually 5 minutes is a good length of time for most of them. Some of them you might like to practice longer, up to maybe 45 minutes even. So in some of these mudras, they can be practiced outside of meditation as well. So for example, when you're sitting still, like you might be sitting on an airplane or on a train, then that sometimes that can be a good way too. It's good though if you're quiet. You don't really want to do it while you're talking or anything like that. You want to be focused inward. And it is possible to do mudras incorrectly so that you don't you don't get the benefits from it. So, for example, some will call for using your fingertips, right? And the tip of the finger, again, we're talking about the nerves and the sensitivity, is different than if I, for example, press the finger down like this and I'm using the pad of my thumb. Yeah, so that's a different mudra. And so the same thing happens then with Jnana Mudra, or what some people call Chin Mudra. So here's one way of doing it. But then when we go here, then it's different, right? And then there's actually one that's here as well. But sometimes, you know, we'll just get a little lazy and just kind of throw our fingers up there together. And I suggest that you be much more specific than that. And the other thing too is that, let's say we'll use this mudra as an example. And so I'm doing the mudra. And so if I'm sitting there like this, that's very different than if I actually actively participate with my hand and extend the fingers, right? You don't have to be rigid about it, but you do need to be present in it, right? So it's not about kind of going to just doing something and going to sleep, right? So the idea is to wake up to the movement of our prana and to be aware of it and participate in it. So we're working the subtle energies to a degree so that we can increase our consciousness. So that precision in consciousness is helpful in the practice. And the other thing too is if the hands are stiff and you have a difficult time bringing your hand into that mudra position, then it's okay. You know, you just go in the direction that you can go. I have one that I've worked on for a lot of years. This is Varuna Mudra, which is the tip of the pinky and thumb touching. So on my right hand, I can do that just fine. On my left hand, oh, this finger doesn't lay down yet, but it used to be that these two fingers were up. You see there's progression. And that's very helpful for balancing the fluids in the body. So if you feel like, oh, I can't do it, there's always a starting point. And somebody's asked the question, how do you experience how do you know that you are getting the benefit? And all of these practices, Ayurveda and yoga, are about our direct experience. It's about becoming conscious and aware of ourselves and attentive to the subtleness of our own existence. It makes life completely different. And so, yes, we need to get input from others and that, but then we take it and it's like trying on a piece of clothing. We see, does it fit me? I'm the one who should decide that, not anybody else. And then you can take this experience that you might have with the practices into the rest of your life. And that's what happens when you practice regularly over a period of time. And as with anything, extremes or an excess of practice isn't good. It's not going to be helpful. It's not going to take you towards sattva. And it will often set you back. So we've been sharing some mudras for calming vata dosha and some others on our Instagram page. So I just wanted to, I'm running out of time here. A couple of things I wanted to say about asana practice. Many years ago, I used to do my teacher trainings one-on-one. And I really enjoyed the interaction, seeing the students grow and develop, and I did too. You give the practices to the student and they come, and when they're ready and they feel like they're ready for something else, or the teacher calls them back, then the progress really came, it seemed to me, much more quickly. So one of the things to consider with an asana practice is the principle of like attracts like, and the opposite brings balance. So if you already have a mind that's just going, it's moving quickly, it's all over the place, then having an asana practice that moves quickly is going to be imbalancing. It's going to make you worse. Yeah. So most people these days could be holding poses at least 10 breaths and probably somewhere between 15 and 25 breaths. It would depend on your constitution. And that's where you would get the greatest benefit. And so this is where mastery of the mind comes in. We build strength. The word flow, I've heard it a lot these days. And it's a commercial word that's been given to how people practice yoga some. But the word flow doesn't mean fast. Perhaps it just means continuous, which is a great idea. But if you have trouble staying in the moment and you tend to be moving quickly, this is going to put you out into the future. What's next? What's coming? And this may not take you in the direction of a state of yoga. So keeping the mind in the practice is a great benefit. At Hale, we make sure that you go in and out of a posture the exact same way. So the going in and out is part of the posture. And this takes focus and presence. So your mind doesn't get to quit in between. But going faster in order to try to accomplish that is not a good idea. Yeah. And we have some things coming up on our app, Live Ayurveda and Yoga, where we'll be talking about ways to practice and that. And I just wanted to mention it here, that practicing at home these days is great. I think this is one of the great things that's happened with the changes in the world that we're experiencing. And so practicing at home is wonderful, but if you're looking at something online, this isn't a good idea. You don't want to split your attention. So the way we're approaching it is that you can look at information and you learn about it, and then when you're actually practicing and doing it, that you're having audio for that instruction only, so that you're keeping your focus inward as much as possible. Otherwise, you're starting to do the opposite of what yoga is meant to do. So I don't advise looking at the screen while you're practicing. And this is going to aggravate vata. Anytime you split your attention, you'll aggravate vata. And so the idea is that you're tuning in to yourself. Yeah. So I'm really grateful for the internet and YouTube and all of the tools that we have that we can allow us to connect. I love to teach asana, so I was thinking that's why we are going to be putting those kinds of things into our app. And what we really want is a home practice for you, so that you can get the best results. So let's see. I think that's it. So one other comment about this, and that is that these practices, it's not about the practice. In the beginning, we have to learn it and that, but it's really not about the practices. It's about the coming to know ourselves and then taking that out into life. So when I wash the dishes, when I do the other things in my life, that I can be the very best person that's possible. And I can do that when I have a sense of myself as eternal spirit. Great, and I think we have a few questions here.
Okay, first question. Can asana practice be harmful if you're doing asana that doesn't match your constitution or prakriti? In which way would it be harmful? Can we create imbalances with asana?
Okay, that's a great question, and I already answered some of that by what I was talking about. It's that principle in nature that like attracts like. So, for example, if I have excess vata, then I will tend to want to do things fast, and if I have excess pitta, I'll want to do things push and get in a very physical and vigorous way. So the answer to your question is, can it imbalance? Yes, you can create imbalance with asana. You can create imbalance with anything in life. Extremes, pushing, and that's where the breath is so important, because the breath is the indicator. If your breathing gets disturbed, then you're out of balance. When you try something new, sometimes the breathing will speed up, but then you need to be able to bring it back down. And if not, then you're going too far. Yeah? The mind is not ready yet. Sometimes the body is ready. Physically, you could get the body to do something, but if the mind isn't ready, then that's not a good idea. Yeah. So you need to bring things into sync and then move along in your asana practice. So hopefully I answered that question. Yeah. Oh, in which way would it be harmful? Well, it'll increase those imbalances. So the mind will want to move too fast, the tendency to be too aggressive, the tendency to not pay attention to the body. So for example, just because our body can do something doesn't mean that it's a good idea. Chew on that one a little.
Any breathing exercises to assist with panic attacks?
Yes. Well, one of the very simplest things is to go into balasana, or child's pose, and breathe through your mouth. And that's a very good thing. Now, if you're sitting somewhere and you feel like you absolutely can't do that, then you can just try breathing through your mouth. Now, typically, we're going to talk about breathing through the nose in our yoga practices, but when you want to release that energy, you're not going to resolve it, but you're going to release it to take the fear down in the mind and therefore in the body. Then breathing through the mouth will be helpful, and slowing the breath down as much as possible. But child's pose, or getting yourself into a pose where the spine is just slightly curved forward, would be helpful. So if you were sitting somewhere, even if you were to bend forward, that can be helpful.
What do you recommend to heal trauma?
Well, it depends a little bit. Trauma is something about, sometimes, all of us have difficult things that happen in life. They can be really small things and we see it as difficult. They can be really big things, and some people won't even see it as that difficult. So it's about our perception. It is about the mind. So healing trauma, especially something that was a long time ago, there are a number of tools that can be used, but the breath is one of the main ones. And the biggest thing is that you find the starting point. It needs to be done gently. You know, gentle to me, gentle means that there's love that's present. I'm not trying to achieve anything. I'm not trying to get anywhere. I'm just gently opening things up. So if you think of the trauma as a samskara, which is a memory, that we have, and I think of it as a picture, and we carry it around. And then when I resolve it, it goes back, it goes into the archives. But if I keep it, if I don't resolve it, it keeps getting awakened. And then I see the world through that. So it's a process. Sometimes it happens very quickly and easily, and sometimes it takes quite a while. But working with the breath and working with these practices of meditation and that, because coming to know your inner world and yourself as eternal spirit takes us beyond, and we can start to see the samskara and be able to resolve the charge that we have around it.
Usually I practice yoga on an empty stomach at home at 7 a.m. and this works well. What to do if you have a 9, 10 or even 11 a.m. class? Should I skip breakfast altogether or have something light before, and what would you recommend?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, what you don't want to do is do asana practice with food that's digesting. So if you have small something and it's 2 hours later, a small something would be okay 2 hours later. A little of it's going to depend on your digestion, but if your digestion's in good shape, you should be okay with that. Again, it probably also depend on what you ate. So if you're having something simple like a porridge or fruit, you would be okay. I would want 3 hours for me personally. So 3 hours definitely. Yeah. So if you have the 7 a.m. class, yeah. So what you don't want to do is eat and then go practice. This is not a good idea. Not only for the practice, but your digestion, right? Your Agni, your digestive fire will get disturbed by that. And then you start to create toxins in the body. And so on those days, then you might have to adjust. And that having an 11 a.m. class though, and if you eat breakfast at 7:30 or something like that, then that should be okay.
As someone with low blood pressure, I find that Kapalabhati practice makes me dizzy and lowers my body further. Do you have any suggestions to prevent this effect or reduce it?
Okay. So usually when you have low blood pressure, then you have high vata, usually. And in which case Kapalabhati might not be the right practice for you right now. And so you might be also trying to do too much of it. Yeah, too many repetitions is not a good idea. So you could number one, leave it out. Number two, you could also do a small amount and not too fast. That's the other thing. So if you do it slowly and just start with 10 bursts and see if it changes. So in other words, you back yourself up to the point where you're not getting dizzy. And if there isn't a point, then it's not for you yet.
What about jogging and other sports that agitate breathing?
Okay. Well, it's not really the jogging that irritates your breathing or agitates it. What happens is that you're trying to do things that you're not ready to do, perhaps. So maybe just go for a walk instead. Yeah. I say that only because if you're jogging on a hard surface, it's really not a good idea. In the long run, you're going to look back and say, "Oh, I could have done without that." Yeah. So does it agitate your breathing? If you go beyond your capacity, then yes, it will. And will that make things worse? Yes, it will. So I don't suggest that. So maybe a little bit less of whatever you're doing is one choice. And it really depends on the other activities and what you're doing. But anytime you're breathing, you get you run out of breath, you might say. Yeah, this isn't a great place to go. You can just challenge yourself and breathe continuously. And what's interesting is that, for example, I do 108 Surya Namaskar every week, once a week. I do that, and I do it. They're continuous, and it's just a nice, moderate pace. It's not fast, just like I'm moving my hand, not even quite that fast. And so at the end of it, my heart rate is up some. Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. And then I breathe, and it comes down very, very easily. I'm breathing through the whole thing. But then when I stop physically moving and I breathe, then it lowers easily. So you want to look for activities where you're not putting yourself into excessive stress, because that's really not what makes us stronger. But that consistent challenge, I call it, without the stress, then is what I have found works the best. Okay.
Okay, 2 more questions.
Oh, okay.
One, for a person who has nasal problems, what do you suggest for pranayama?
Oh, I suggest first that you clear up the nasal problems. Yeah, you need to get an Ayurvedic consultation. So, but you can do, there's a practice called Jnana Mudra that's very nice, which is drawing the senses inward. And so if you can breathe through your nose at all, that's a really great place to start. Yeah.
Any pranayama a person who has vata imbalances should not practice?
Well, we that other question that we had, is an example. So Kapalabhati, if it's done too fast and too much, can aggravate vata. But the right amount and a nice slower pace of the Kapalabhati can still be good when vata is high. Depends on how high. So this is why it's very much a personal practice. And so what I'd say is Bhastrika and Kapalabhati are not practices that should be done in any great degree if someone has excess vata. Yeah. The practice of pranayama should be put together in a balanced way so that you start out and you want to bring balance to the doshas first. And then when that's in a pretty good place, then you start to allow it to progress. Okay, good. I think that's it for today. So it's great to be with you, and I'll look forward to next time. And stay with your practices, be consistent, get some good guidance, and we're always happy to help you out. All right, take care. Namaste.